It is essential to talk about the environment, how to preserve it, how to defend it, how to preserve humankind, how to preserve our natural landscape and our natural habitat. Today, I have the pleasure to discuss with Mr. Georgiadis Pavlos, who's an expert on the environment. He's an environmentalist himself, and he's also an expert and a scientist on biodiversity and protection of the natural habitat. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos. I'm the CEO and founder of Strategy International, and this is Prime Analysis. Dear Mr. Georgiadis, thank you very much for joining us at Prime Analysis of Strategy International. Welcome.
Thanks for your kind invitation, and I'm really glad to have this conversation with you today.
So I would like to discuss, if you want, the environment, which is something that is really important. And I think discussing about biodiversity, conservation, the ecosystem, restoring climate action, taking action actually is very important. But it is normal in our prime analysis to discuss, if you want, the successes and the reasons for someone to be taking place at the professional level of the environment and the environmental protection. So I would like to start a bit with your life experiences. So where do we see young Pavlos finishing high school and moving on into university? Where are we standing there?
Right, this is an interesting question. Well, I guess I grew up inside nature. I remember my childhood inside olive groves and roaming in nearby forests in the northeastern coast of Greece. Obviously, as a people coming or living close to the sea, we are also very accustomed to the wet environment, the oceans, the seas. But finishing off high school, I left my hometown, Alexandroupoli, in the northeast coast of Greece, and I moved to Scotland for my studies on biology. And over there, I had the pleasure and the privilege to study with some leading scientists in the area of biological sciences, in particular botany and plant science. And that's already going over 20 years back now. But I guess overall for my generation, I think we are a generation that kind of grew through the whole problematic of environmental protection. And I think we are kind of the first generation of fully fledged professionals to work on protecting the environment. And I'm hoping this trend, well, I'm pretty sure this trend will continue as the yet younger generation, our children, have this problematic embedded since very, very early in their lives.
And I think I remember, I think we were pretty much of the same generation of age. We were then studying, all of us, directly or indirectly, about the environment, but maybe we were not taking things as serious as they may be today, considering the fact that the environment is always something that we kept on the back end of our minds, probably thinking that, Mother Nature will fix will fix itself somehow, and we will help out into this. And I think we were at the age where, recycling started to be a more indicative element of, protect the environment. But you've done your studies in related specific affairs of science, related with science itself on the environment. And I think people like yourself should give us an insight of what's happening with the climate. We've been seeing the climate has been changing so much in the air that we breathe, in the clouds, in the sea, in the forest. We've seen fires and upscaling, the Celsius more than 1.5%. In fact, Europe, from that end where we are, Europe has seen that much heat for the first time in many, many, many years. And it seems that this heat every year goes at least 1 Celsius higher. And the agreement of international of the international community of countries, in the engagement with the Paris Agreement and now the agreements that took place either in Canada or the latest agreements with regards to the CO2 emissions and the limiting of on 1.5 Celsius. is something that we clearly understand on a political level, but we may not understand on a scientific level. So, what does this mean for you? I mean, I know that your experience from academia leading to the professional life has had an impact on you, presumably. But what does it mean for people? Climate change, first of all, and secondly, what does it mean 1.5 Celsius?
Well, I think it worth going really to the basics of it. The Earth is a big and complex system. It's like our human body consists of different organs, of different processes, of different interactions within the organs. So it's a big organism in a way. The survival and the functioning of the planet is based on a number of fundamental, really basic cycles. We probably have heard about the water cycle, how it circulates from the oceans up to the clouds, and then it precipitates down to the earth. It feeds our crops, it feeds our water bodies, and then essentially it feeds our bodies and nourishes and gives us, the basic needs for our survival as humans. Well, another very important cycle is the carbon cycle, how carbon is circulated from, all the biomass that we see out there, the plants, the animals. They are composed of hydrocarbons, water and carbon. When a tree is standing, through photosynthesis, it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere, it stores it in its organs, in the trunk, in the leaves, in the roots. And then when the tree dies, this decomposes and the carbon steeps down to the earth again. Now, this process has been going around for millions, even billions of years on the earth. And as this carbon is stored in the ground, it goes underground, it becomes fossilized. And these are the fossil fuels that we use today to burn, to produce energy: petrol, natural gas, coal. So the problem with climate change started when we disrupted this cycle and we started extracting way too much carbon from the earth, from the guts of the earth, and through burning, through combustion, we released it in gaseous form in the atmosphere.
What is known as the industrial age, I presume.
Yes, the Industrial Revolution afterwards. We all know it was based on steel production, on intensive coal burning, and then later on we had other types of fossil fuels. So basically, we started producing a scale. There were fewer people producing in bigger scale to cater the needs of more people.
Right.
And in that way, we disrupted this basic cycle that has been going for billions. So we started extracting way faster from the earth and releasing carbon to the atmosphere. And this has created what we call the greenhouse effect. Right. Greenhouse effect traps the sun rays, the heat from the sun, the vital source of heat.
Yeah.
Also, the ozone layer is also a part of this system. But like by trapping the heat inside this transparent layer of the atmosphere, like a greenhouse does, where we grow vegetables in modern agriculture, this started raising global temperature. And then at some point, scientists came together and said that in order for Earth and the human civilization to survive, and of course the other forms of life, the biodiversity on Earth to survive, we need to keep this global warming at a maximum of 1.5 degrees in comparison to the pre-industrial levels where we didn't burn so much carbon, like over 200 years ago. And now this is where we are, that we start realizing that all the science and all the metrics show that the concentrations of carbon in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are crossing a number of critical thresholds that start raising some flags about the very resilience of our environments, of our economies, because they are also liable to natural resources and the health of the planet, and ultimately to our own quality of life.
I always wonder why 1.5 Celsius. I mean, how do we come to this math? I know that scientifically you have progressed also, I presume, with a master's now. As you have told me earlier, you're completing your PhD. So I guess all the things that you are saying somehow have been transferred to a scientific level on the things that you want to work with. And we have not completed yet your personal life scale, because I know that we stopped at the level of graduation of the first degree. But all these elements probably led you to complete your studies and your professional skill sets, which, you should tell us a few things where you are today. But I want to know also from you, what does 1.5 Celsius means? Why not 2? Why not 1? And so on.
Well, I compare the planet with the human body as a complex system of interactions. We know that we know what is the normal body temperature. It's 36.6 degrees Celsius. And we know that when we start crossing over 37.5, 38 degrees, we start having fever.
Right.
And this fever is creating some problems, some headache, some reduced attention and concentration. We don't feel good. And this is visible, this is evident. We have to stay at home, we have to take some rest, we need to recover, we take medicine. And how do we measure that? We put a thermometer, we put a sensor on our body, and we go to a doctor, we go to a scientist, and he prescribes a medication or a course of action. Well, just make this comparison with the planet, that we know what is the normal temperature, and then we know above which level it starts having fever. Above 1.5% is fever. Well, a little bit more. Beyond 2 or 3 degrees, then it's a critical situation,
right,
where, essential ecosystems and essential, processes start collapsing. And what we do, we go to the scientists, and the scientists are analyzing the data with numerous sensors. Nowadays, we have the ability to observe the Earth system from space through numerous satellite systems. We have in situ on the ground sensors who are measuring a number of metrics from, wind and temperature and soil moisture and all those environmental factors. And we have other tools like, drones flying and observing the Earth, bioacoustics, even DNA studies are informing how our ecosystems and how our planet is doing.
How did it affect your personal life in the scientific level of experience? Because the way that you're describing it showcase that you finish your degree and then you go on into your master's degree and then you proceed as a professional. How did this affect your judgment or your choice to follow a path that is based on environment?
Well, this didn't come from the beginning as a revelation, but it's rather like something that it's continuous and it comes as new lessons. And I have to admit, the last couple of years that I became a father myself, it's a whole new era of understanding, because
Absolutely.
you just see the world differently and you put the different pieces differently. And also, not to mention that, for the last 5 to 10 years, we have seen a massive awareness about those issues going throughout the society. So this changes everything. The discussion is not only confined within the walls of academia or within of business, but it has to reach out to wider audiences. And this inevitably shifts the language and even changes the ethics, the way we speak about
Absolutely,
this.
absolutely.
So, well, for one thing, I feel lucky and that I start this journey early in my life, because when you kind of see your own life through the lens of life on Earth, and you go past this philosophical flaw that it is the environment, it is us humans, and then there is something that environs us, and we feel detached from that. I think is a little bit obsolete now, because now we are in an era of realization that we are part of this system. We influence this system. We can deplete it, we can win it, but we can also heal it and protect it. Ultimately, protecting ourselves. And again, I will do here the human body planet analogy by saying that we can either choose to be the cancer of the planet, or we can be the immune system of the planet. And if you ask me in a nutshell, how does it feel? Well, it kind of feels great to be part of the immune system of the planet. And, the immune system continuously evolves and continuously learns.
So do tell us a bit in your professional life, the current state that you are at. How does it offer its knowledge, capacity in that organism that is called the environment? How do you study the data? How do you process the data? And you said something very, very important, the interdisciplinary approach to this, because through your through your answer, we will also pivot if you want to talk, if you want more about the production phase, the consumption phase, the footprint, the human footprint, if you want. So how does your professional life now, being at the level that you are, so our audience can understand better, if you want, the equation onto the environment, how does this affect you, and what do you say to people to not rather protect the environment, but what to be aware of mostly?
First of all, I think it's not about saving or protecting the environment or the planet. I think the planet will do fine in any way or another. It has survived much more serious events. It is about preserving ourselves, preserving humans, preserving human life. And I think speaks to people, speaks especially to people that care about their children and their children's children, and the possibility that might have to live in a world with prosperity, without conflict, or without too much conflict, without the risk for collapse. And I think this is very powerful. Now, as far as concerns myself, I started from biology and plant taxonomy. I did close to 8 years of field work in Southeast Asia, in the Indian Himalayas, collecting plants and documenting forest ecosystems there. And then I moved on to the social sciences because it was evident to me that it is people that will need to work on that. And when we talk about people, we are talking about behavioral change, cultural change, social change, and the dimension it has in the policy arena. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm one of the lucky ones because this happened in a time that all this realization came about through social movements, but also through ambitious policy action. It was within those last 25 to 30 years that the world came together and said, okay, sustainability is the term. We need to get together. We need to see past what divides us and put at least a minimum issues that we agree to take action on. And, this is a guiding principle that I have been following in my professional life, as you suggest, either as a consultant or as an educator or as a social catalyst and science communicator, and brings me now through my work in global conservation projects, global forest conservation projects, which are essential for, keeping up the resilience of the planet and keeping us, well, if not below, at least close to 1.5 degree.
I think you just gave me the reason to ask you multiple questions. I'll try to be as short to the questions and as direct as possible. But one of the things that comes to my mind is sustainable goals of the UN. Mm. Do they actually work? Because actually, it's a social action. It's a call for action. It's a call for awareness. It's a call for action for people to get more together and so on. Because the human footprint along the lines includes also not only the exposure and the utility or the massive utility of our natural resources, but also exposes other indirect methods where in between wars or fires or the exploitation of the natural habitat and the destruction of the natural habitat is a question. And the second question that I'm actually thinking, which is very important, is that recently world governments through the United Nations stated that 30% of their land will be provided to the preservation of their natural habitat. And I think that's where you fit even more. So what's your insights about those two, sustainable goals and 30% of the natural preservation of the habitat?
Indeed. I think these are like landmark, conceptual frameworks that provide direction of travel. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is that for the first time, humanity, governments, the global economy has a roadmap with specific targets and milestones and indicators for monitoring progress towards those goals that need to be fulfilled within a given time frame in order to put the planet back and put our societies back towards a healthy trajectory. And it is like, for the first time, we onboard a train that has a direction of travel and specific stations where we are going. And this is already a very big achievement. And there might be a little bit of skepticism around, how efficient we are towards implementing the SDGs or, how fast we are doing this. But we have to understand that it's not an easy issue. There are 17 goals. All of them are interrelated. There are differences how different societies and how different economies and political systems are responding towards those targets. There are different development legacies in different parts of the world and different countries. And a country that is in the desert has a totally different challenge to face in comparison to an island country, for example.
Right,
So
right, right.
all these need to come to play. But the SDGs, I think, is a great overarching and interdisciplinary, indeed, international framework for collaboration that spans, all those topics from poverty alleviation, ending hunger, all the way to health, education, innovation, forests,
Security,
oceans, cities.
security overall.
So these are the big processes that, well, at least if we keep them unchecked, then we won't have any progress. So I think the SDGs is something that all of us, all of the society needs to back with our everyday choices. Then you also mentioned the 30 by 30 target. This is the third target of the Global Biodiversity Framework that was decided a couple of years ago in the Kunming-Montreal process of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this is an action that is targeting governments and what type of legislation governments will build in order to protect their most precious ecosystems. And this 30 by 30 goal says that they should dedicate 30% of their land area to protected area. Well, protected area doesn't mean that there is no human presence or economic activity, but all this happen within limits that preserve the integrity and the health of those ecosystems. And I think this is also a huge step forward because governments can adjust their legislation. They can create new legislation that gives a clear direction of travel to the business world, to the society, to the
Are
world.
the SDG goals legally binding to all countries? And the reason why I'm asking this is because we see countries that are either extensively using or abusing the environment. So former government, for example, of Brazil with deforestation, an example case. Or we see countries or islands which are actually, which are small states. They can't do too much. They're raising awareness into the UN that we're going under the water. We're not going to be saved. What are we going to do with this? Or you have countries that are under war situations. So are they truly engaged, or are we aiming to do the majority, and then we see what happens with the minority with this one? Because all these elements, for example, in major events, as you said, the Montreal meeting and so on, a lot of NGOs go, a lot of people that are pressure groups, consultants on environment and so on and so forth. But you also stated earlier that these elements are interdisciplinary in the approach, so it affects us all. And one of the main achievements, considerable achievement, at least to the countries that are free, and they have sovereignty and control over the governments. It is now evident that environmental policy, whatever this may mean, overall or in sequences, have now an awareness project, have now a main concern that we have to be environmentally friendly to our main cities, to our landscapes, and so on and so forth. But I'm also wondering about the fact that we live in a volatile environment where war has been multiplied. War equally means destruction of the natural habitat, not only that humans die, but actually, the disintegration, new alliances, forging of alliances. And I think none of them would have environment as the first part of the agenda. Do you actually think that SDG goals can actually apply to the solution to probable wars and find alternate solutions for conflict resolutions in the end of the day? So, because you have SDG, the SDG of security and justice. So the security and justice means actually resolution of conflicts as well. So in the stake that, awareness, you correctly put, that people don't have to worry about the earth, but they have to worry about themselves, whether they should be preserved and how can they be preserved. So can we actually figure it out whether the SDG works, considering the fact that we live in a volatile global environment at this point?
Well, I think it's a process. It's always a process. And, at least we start mapping out what needs to happen in order to provide the necessary minimum ground for at least some minimum collaboration. And indeed, the SDGs promote peace and international cooperation. And I think what is actually interesting about the SDGs is that they have made such a big communication splash that SDGs now are so well known by almost every business, a big amount of the society out there. There are so many awareness actions that go down to the neighborhood level. And let's don't forget that these are goals that are targeted at the
Yeah,
United
yeah.
Nations level, decided the United Nations level, and it gives a commitment. They are not legally bound, but it is a process where big countries or big conglomerations of countries like the EU, for example, has a mandate to 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 serve these goals. And then the next step is to legally register them, to legally bind them. There is right now in the EU a big discussion about the EU restoration law. And what the EU restoration law will do is that will take all those directives that we have since 20, 30 years in the EU, and thank God we have them because they provide for clean air and clean water and a clean environment. We have the water directive, we have the habitat directive and so on. But again, these are voluntary commitments. They are not legally binding. When we transition to the status of a law, we have something that is legally binding. It has certain thresholds that need to be kept, and it has certain timelines for delivery. So I think environmental legislation, climate laws, biodiversity laws are a very, very big milestone that we need to achieve to at least a big part of the world, like a
So
big chunk of country.
so biodiversity laws versus wealth on the environment. Could we say that? Well, I know we had discussed about the climate justice. How do we bring justice into being? And I think putting the data down, saying this is your wealth, this is your conservation, this is the way that you should do it, because you also talk about a planetary balance, if I may say that. But we also mentioned that they're not legally binding. So I'm a bit concerned considering the fact that, I remember when I was a student, we were doing a class of environmental law. And I remember the professor who was a lawyer was telling me, he said, a lot of countries don't understand that we breathe the same air. So they actually think that our air ends in reality in the air that is our natural boundary, country boundary. But this air transfers from one place to another. The same thing applies with water. With water resources for different water resources that they flow around, and we've lately seen the destruction of a lot of areas which are lacking water. I mean, one of the countries that I saw a deep impact lately is Iraq, which is one of the heaviest hit countries with regard to environmental destruction. So, where do we stand with regards to natural wealth, the preservation of natural wealth, and where do we stand with regards to climate justice? When I say climate justice, I mean the social effect. What are social boundaries on climate justice?
Yes, you're right to mention that, the environment does not consider political boundaries or jurisdictions. If a river is polluted in your neighboring country and the river flows through your country, then the physical boundary of the countries is not affecting the situation. So the key here is collaboration and cooperation,
Right.
and this is exactly what those treaties and this international discussion dialogue tries to achieve. In terms of production and consumption pattern, again, we live in in an era where global trade and globalization has exploded really over the last 15, 20 years. Maybe some people argue that it has reached also its peak, where we have way more products transferred and raw materials and resources transferred from the other side of the world to reach us, to reach our lives. And you see the effect, how you get bigger and bigger airplanes and bigger cargo ships. And
But they say
some
they're environmentally friendly. Are they environmentally friendly truly? Because
well,
there may be. I
there
mean,
is
it may be
technology
one
that's
plane, but you have like thousands of planes in the air every day.
this is interesting. It's like some people saying, okay, I'm eating organic meat, so I can eat a little bit more.
I hope that it's not just a checklist that I made a plane that is environmentally friendly, because one plane may make a difference, but when you have like 200 planes, do they actually make a difference?
I think this is, well, we can make a difference if we also engage the big guys. Like, we
Yeah,
get
of
who
course.
are the 10 biggest, food companies, who are the 10 biggest energy providers or provider countries. And these type of entities do come together in conglomerates, in
Yes,
discussion
indeed.
fora. And there is indeed action that targets those. And actually, sometimes I argue that it's probably easier to target those entities, to kind of monitor how good or bad they are doing and put them into the spotlight. Yes, they might have bigger influence power over politics and so on, but on the other side,
Yeah.
they are into the households of millions and billions of people who have a choice through their consumption habits to influence. That's why I think it's important that as 21st century humans who have awareness and we have all those communication and information tools, we should be able to look one step and two, three steps behind what is in my mobile phone, what is
Yes, yes.
in the food I put in my plate, how do I choose to wake up every morning and transfer
So
to
it's
my
a
job or
collective.
to.
It's a collective
Yes.
awareness and action plan, probably.
Well, it cannot be otherwise. Like the world is moving forward, the technology is advancing, but we cannot put all our hopes into technology and data on itself. These are just um, codes, languages that we have in order to interpret the semantics of the natural world, right?
Hmm.
We have our brains, our noses, our ears, and our eyes and our fingers to kind of
Yeah, of
feel the
course.
world, and we have data to kind of put value, assign value next to those semantics of the natural world. But I think what is key here is how we take all these cues we take from the environment and all the understanding and all the data that we have, how do we make them relevant to our everyday lives so we build our knowledge? So I think humanity right now, when we talk about the transition, the green transition, is not about shifting from a petrol running car to an electric car. It's also about shifting attitudes and shifting our own understanding, expanding our own understanding on where exactly we stand in the world. Do I drive an electric car because it is fashion, it is status, or do I do it because it improves the air quality, or a little bit of everything?
It's
But
quite.
again,
It's quite.
do I understand the footprint
Yeah,
of this
yeah.
new technology in terms of new
Oh yeah,
minerals
in
that
terms of
are
technology, it's
being
well, it's not brand new, but it's now more commercialized, I would say, because electrical movement has been there for a while, but it takes for the price to go down. It needs a lot of commercialization. I would think, but while you said that about electric cars, I also kind of thought, seeing the scientific, if you want, reports coming out that electric car may be less CO2 emission, but the tools with which they're qualified to be, created and sustained, they create as much as CO2 emission. So are the electrical cars by definition doing something good in the environment, or not? I mean, we've seen companies taking a decision not to go entirely on electric movement of cars, where in fact initially they said, then they saw the cost, or they saw how much their footprint is there. So, keeping the, if you want, these last minutes together, I wanna put the social boundaries. I want to go inside the social affairs and social element, and I want to put three, if you want, parameters. One, commercialization or protection of the environment, and if so, how? That's one. The second one is, how do we engage into something that I've been stating throughout our discussion today, the protection of the environment as one of the solutions or a reason for end of wars, because the wars create environmental destruction. Look what's
Mm.
happening around the world, like Africa, South America, Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, East Asia, South Asia, and we see, increasing cancer, because of the air destruction, because of the natural habitat destruction, so on and so forth. And the last part, which I think is really important, that comes out from what you said today, is the fact that in reality we're trying to preserve humankind, because you said something very
Mhm.
important. The earth will recover. The question is, are we going to recover? And I think that is really important. Do people understand in that social boundary that in reality we're talking about our preservation? When somebody can say, well, demographically, humans are expanding. We're more than 7.5 billion people, and we're now looking at alternatives to go colonize other planets, or even utilize in exchange of the environmental protection natural resources from other planets. So how do you get all these parameters and in a short period of time tell us that this is a social boundary, this is our policy choice, this is our political choice, because politicians also measure the political cost in this.
Well, for sure. I think, just quick answer to the three questions that you do is like, I do think that it makes sense to kind of escape this, fundamentalism, economic fundamentalism around the current economic system, extractive, liberal economic system that doesn't leave too much space for any other alternatives to arise, at least at the local level. It's obviously a system that works for few or, and doesn't for others. And this brings the issue of social justice that you mentioned. Right. Any action we take in terms of policy and climate action will need to consider everyone. And there is a motto behind those policies that we leave no one behind. And, what does it mean? It means that, we don't look only those that can afford the better technology and the cleaner technology, but also we take consideration of the least franchised communities of our world. Then the conundrum protection versus commercialization, I also think, if we escape this fundamentalism, as I like to call it, we also see that there is not really a boundary between the two. It's not bad to protect, and it's not bad to commercialize. Of course, within limits, within planetary and social limits. I don't see any problem with commercializing small-scale non-timber forests from the Brazilian Amazon, as long as a number of environmental and social and cultural safeguards are in place, as long as the indigenous people living in these territories since centuries continue to have a livelihood within those ecosystems, and not only a livelihood, but also being able to improve their lives by sustainable utilization of those resources. This entails a degree of commercialization. The question is, how do we commercialize? Do we commercialize in a centralized manner or in a decentralized manner, which kind of spreads the benefits to wider spectrum of the society? And then in terms of protection, yes, indeed, there will be some areas that we need to leave for gorillas and toucans and for this lizard and those 30 species of frogs that need to continue to exist, because they are, again, fundamental to our very own survival. Our food, our clothes, our medicine depends on this biodiversity, and we need to preserve it. We need to live in coexist with them. And it's a matter of keeping our balance. I can choose to have a massive footprint, but I can also choose to live more modestly because I care for all these other factors, and it just feels good. And, I wasn't born through that. I shaped my behavior around that.
Right,
and
right,
I think this is what distinct us from other animals as humans. We are probably the only animal species that we have the ability to modify our behavior throughout our lives, and not actually our own very own behavior, but actually influence our communities and our societies. And there are several large countries that over this last 100 years have gone through so many things and so much change and adaptation, because the guiding principle is survival of the culture, survival of some very basic values. And this is exactly what we are talking about here. And, well, I'm a big lover of planet Earth myself, and
so are we. I think all people are somehow. I mean, if you tell them that they're going to lose their feet off the ground, I think they would.
I don't see how much realism exists in saying we're going to colonize Mars and all this. But again, who knows? 20, 30 years ago, who would have imagined? Well, 40 years ago, who would have imagined that we will have a small smart device in our pockets where we are able to communicate? And then what? People came together, they pieced the puzzle together, and here we are, and everyone has a mobile phone. And the question is, do we need how many and how much innovation if this keeps ruining resources and ecosystems in the other part of the planet? Why should I have the latest smartphone, knowing that there are children exploited in some mine in sub-Saharan Africa? And I think this is like a type of understanding that we as humans need at some point to cross a line. And I think if we do that, we might as well have fewer conflict, or at least be ready to engage in a constructive dialogue that doesn't lead us. So we change this trajectory that leads us towards self-destruction.
We've engaged more into the social, if you want, structure of things. I have a last question, which I think you're going to smile on how big this may be, but can we live? You said at some point we should not rely 100% on technology. The question is, can we live without technology, considering the fact that from the age of industrial revolution, if you want to call it, meaning the more intensive use of technology, R&D, metals, and all subsidiaries of even gas and oil and so on and so forth. Can we actually live without them? Because that looks very okay, can be done, but probably you've probably seen some NGOs or some people protesting about the environment. Don't use petrol, don't use gas, don't fly with planes, and so on and so forth. And every now and then somebody comes out on social media and says, well, what you're wearing needs petrol, where you're going with needs petrol, what you're doing needs metals, and so on and so forth. So what do you think we should do? Should we limit? But by limitation, this means that the price will go skyrocketing. Do we continue with the abundance of choices, but therefore creating a massive wasteland? Because a lot of artifacts have an end date, therefore they're not all recycled, therefore a wasteland is created. Look what is happening outside, with waste in general in Maldives. Something that people know Maldives more as a touristic area, but there's an island of full of waste, and hence also the destruction of the natural habitat and the water habitat as well. But the technology element we cannot live without. I mean, the use no paper, but the use of a computer, print friendly. I'm just thinking, logos everywhere on the coffees that we drink, the straw that we use, but then again we use plastic. Consider this times 7.5 billion people per day use. What does this mean in terms of technology? What are the alternatives to technology? Some people that do space exploration say, well, the answer is outer space exploration, so we can conserve and provide biodiversity protection in our own planet, and at the same time try to find probably another wasteland for more biodiversity and protection. So where does technology bring the limits? Where can we use technology? How can we limit technology? Or do we need to position ourselves into a different kind of technology, something that will revolutionize the environmental green life, as you correctly put?
Well, this is a big, the billion-dollar answer question, if you want. And indeed, and this points out that, the type of transition we are talking about is not only the matter of biologists, physicists, and economists. It indeed, requires the work of psychologists and political sciences and so on. There is no easy answer, but, I'm in my early 40s. And, I know that it's cheaper and better to prevent than cure. So the question I put in myself is, am I prepared to restrict a little bit now so my children will not have to, these limitations?
You mentioned that as a family member. You mentioned that in the
Do
beginning.
we change by design, or do we change by default? And I think this is a very big issue that we all need to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
To give you an example, digitization is a great thing. The fact that we can save time by not having to travel to a workspace, or we can have a conference, instead of having to travel, by plane, to go and meet in physical space. I think that, yes, these are improvements. But on the other side, digitization also has a footprint in terms of the, power and electricity that needs all the servers. But then again, what use of technology? What use of technology?
Yeah.
Take, for example, watching a movie on Netflix uses the same energy as the entire database of Wikipedia, because it's streaming. And if you consider other sectors like gaming, 1.3 billion gamers, playing video games. This is like a massive footprint. No one knows how much. And like the question here is, how can we use this force in a way that can build solutions rather than just wrecking the planet without any considerations? And this is where all the environmental standards started from. Somebody had too many accidents because people didn't wear seatbelts, and then the automotive industry introduced seatbelts. Somebody had, recognized that we use too many pesticides and fertilizers that ruins water bodies, and then the law came and suggested limits. Well, these industries continue to survive by innovation. So I think that any limits to growth doesn't necessarily mean economic collapse and fewer jobs. And, in the last 40 years, in the duration of my life, the human population has doubled, but the planet didn't. And then, yes, you will have the ultra-rich saying that, okay, I'm going to invest in exploring outer space, in exploring like space life or life on space. I approach it with an open heart and an open mind. But this doesn't mean that the fact that we have the technology to go on Mars means that we should not put our utmost effort to preserve what remains back. And we are already in a massive bottleneck in terms of environment, the environmental integrity of the planet. But we also have a small window of opportunity to, avert a collapse. Right. Because right now we know what we need to do in order to preserve the basic functions of this planet. We don't know if we can survive in another. And you tell me if this is a bet that you would take that could, possibly also mean like the collapse of the human race,
Right. Well, Mr. Georgiadis, I think that was a very, very interesting discussion, considering the fact that we try to cover as much as possible in the environment. What comes out as very important is protection of humans, which is very important and very different from what we usually and commonly hear on the environment, which is something that comes out very important. Number two is the way that we project and the fact that we should all do our own part, small or big. I think one of the last things that comes out is this is our planet, so we have to preserve our planet somehow through our own capabilities, and we can check something else that can add value to it. Scientifically talking, science is very clear, and it is there, as you said, to make sure that the environment is somehow protected and saved and compensated, if you want, with regard to what it's giving us. But one of the things to say, and I think I'm right to say that it cannot be summarized over 45 minutes of a discussion between two scientists. But I do thank you very much for the amount of time that you have spent in explaining us the current situation as much as one can possibly do within a 45 minutes. I would like to thank you very much on behalf of Strategy International for coming with us today and exploring this, and to renew this possibility of a second level, if you want, of discussion, even more specifics. Considering that it seems that every last year seems to be even better than the current running year. So we'll wait to see what's going to happen also within 24, how things are going to progress or not. It seems that our governments, either in the ocean policies or the forest policies or the 1.2 Celsius, they are keen somehow on, as you correctly put, on the green energy. And as it comes out from the result of our discussion, it is a circular economy, which includes also society, decisions, political costs, but also, as you said, the private sector being involved with the government sector. And I think that is also important. Thank you very much, Mr. Georgiadis, for joining us today. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I thank you for this interesting discussion.
Thank you all for watching another web series of Prime Analysis. Please like, share, subscribe, and follow into our social media and YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos. I'm the CEO and founder of Strategy International, and this was Prime Analysis. And remember, impact makes a difference.